Hello everyone, Dr. Christine Smith back for a really cool session today about ADHD and high performance, especially with women and women's hormones, but really this is going to apply to anybody who struggles with ADD or ADHD. And I am going to invite Christine McCarroll on, and she is basically a holistic functional nutritionist who is also a brain health professional. But essentially, she fell into this niche when she was helping her 2-year-old daughter overcome a neurological speech disorder. But excellent. I'm going to just let her tell you more about that.
Hi, Christine.
Hi there, Christine.
I love saying
How are
hi,
you?
Christine. It's always
I know, it's kind of fun. Yeah, so I was just kind of telling everybody about you a little bit, and that you're a holistic functional nutritionist and that you're also a brain health coach, which we have in common because I know we both love talking about brain stuff, which is awesome. And I'd love if you could just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and kind of how you fell in love with this niche, and then we'll get jamming because I think this is a really important topic for a lot of people, and that ADHD is really
Thank you for having
misunderstood.
me. I was actually trying earlier. I was like, how do I put everything into a little nutshell, because there is so much to it. I will say there were really two phases of me getting into this. So kind of like phase one was I was a mom who had a daughter with a neurological speech diagnosis. And this was 10 years ago. Actually, at this point, more like almost 12 years ago. So my younger daughter is almost 13 and she was a year and a half, and she got this diagnosis of something called apraxia, which meant that she was, for me, just as a mom who didn't know anything, she was losing her words. So she was able to understand everything that was being said to her, but there was a brain break where her brain understood, and she went through all of this battery of tests, but she couldn't get her words out, so that a disconnect happened. And I went super deep. I was basically just like a woman on a mission, not going to let this be my daughter's future. Seeing people online who were saying their kids were like 15, had like 3 words, and I was like, not my kid, right? And not that we can all control that, for sure. So I just thought there had to be something else. Went really deep, figured out some nutritional things. I will fast forward all of the challenges and struggle in there, but the short version is, after we got her on some high doses of, actually they were just 2 things, fish oil and vitamin E, which is crazy. She started like talking in 2 weeks, which it still astounds me to say that. And I actually have gone back in her records, and I did a records request last week. So very interesting for me to be replaying all of this. So that happened when, again, she was really little. I really felt like there was so much unexplored about the relationship of what we put in our body and how our bodies are functioning and performing at that point. So completely changed career direction, decided I wanted to study this and understand this, and then spent the next, almost 10 years just working in functional nutrition. I started to specialize in women's health and hormones because I felt that my health had been damaged while I was putting all of my eggs in my daughter's basket and just, completely depleting myself. So just, was doing that work for a while. And then about a year ago, it was funny because both she and I started going through some hormonal changes. So I started going through perimenopause. My daughter starts going through puberty, and all of a sudden all of this brain stuff starts popping up. And through some things that happened with her school, through me doing some genetic testing, and then both of us doing further assessment, we both get this ADHD diagnosis. And I was like, okay, we started with the brain. 10 years ago. Back to the brain. Clearly this is the work that I need to be doing. And I wanted to sort it out, again, super selfishly, I wanted to sort it out for my kiddo, and I wanted to sort it out for myself, because all of these things that I had thought were unrelated symptoms I had been having for years. When I look back, since I was a kid, all of a sudden, all of that constellation of symptoms made sense. And I wanted to dig deeper and understand that. And then I just realized how under-recognized this is for females, and it's not talked about for women. And there's all these women my age who are starting to understand this, because it was just not a diagnosis that was given when we were kids. People didn't understand that it was women too when we were kids. And I just saw wow, there's just so much here that needs to be unpacked, and nobody's talking about it. So I wanted to talk about it.
Excellent. Amazing. I could not agree with you more. And thank you so much for sharing that about your personal journey. Because I think, all the practitioners I speak to tend to be really passionate in certain areas, and it often comes from life experiences. And there's nothing that drives you more than taking care of your kiddo for sure. So, yeah, let's just kind of dive right into things. So, I guess you mentioned how you can be diagnosed as an adult, and I think a lot of people think that this is the thing that's like only diagnosed in childhood, and then like once you're clear childhood, you're good. And maybe we could also talk about how, timing and life events can play into those things. But I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what it can feel like to have ADHD. And, and just for anybody watching, like this is not medical advice, it's just education. So always please consult your practitioner. But yeah, I'd love to just hear your take on it and what things can
yeah. So kind of like I was saying with what happened to me and what I've just seen like from so many women, and I know we'll talk about, I have a summit coming up, and so many of the experts on there had the same experience of a late diagnosis. And it was because, so like I'm in my 40s, actually tomorrow's my birthday, I'll be 45. And when I was a kid in the 80s, really was the first, like it was when we started having a larger conversation even about it. It was ADD at that point, but we just said this is a thing that happens to little boys, and they grow out of it. So like they're going to hit puberty and they're going to be fine, which we now know both of those things are not true. But when I was a kid and when other women, my age and, maybe 30s plus, like it was not a diagnosis that was ever given. And so we didn't understand that there were, brain differences that looked different for women. And a lot of it is because those little boys who were getting that diagnosis looked like a 180 from the little girl with that same diagnosis. So all of those little boys were like jumping off the walls, crazy hyperactive, like demanding all of the attention from teachers and from parents. And it's not 100% true, because girls and boys can kind of present both, different ways. And I know you know that, but the more typical female presentation is to be more like daydreamy and not paying attention. So it's this called inattentive type. So the little girl might be staring out the window or drawing in her notebook instead of paying attention to the teacher, but she still has the same challenges with accessing her executive function and being able to connect to her prefrontal cortex and like those things that are the same thing. We just don't present the same way. And so also no attention is given to that kid, because why would I spend time with a little girl who's staring out the window when there's this little boy who's maybe like gonna cut off somebody's hair or something, right? So, so we just didn't ever get this opportunity. And what I see happening now is a lot of women like me, where we get a kid who's getting diagnosed, or we see it happening with our child, and then all of a sudden we're like, well, shit, that's me too. Or we get the list of symptoms, or we get the list of, like, here's what happens with their executive function challenges. And you're like, yeah, like check, 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 check. And that's when a lot of women start to have this realization and then decide they're going to go for their own evaluation. So you were asking what it feels like, I think was one of those questions at the beginning, or like maybe what are some of the symptoms. So a lot of it does have to do with that executive function, which just means like the part of your brain that can do planning and organization. So like when I was a kid, and for my kid, oh, do you have something to say there?
I was going to say, and like self-control and like not acting immediately on things.
So my dad, it's so funny because I have one kid who's like exactly like her dad and like very organized. They're like the opposite of us. They are like hyper organized, which is wild. It's like one kid who's like, her shoes are like lined up in her closet. And then my other kid is like, just like, I used to call her very lovingly Pigpen, like the swirl of chaos constantly around her. But that has been me too always, right? Like I remember my desk when I was a kid, and like we had like the little desk and then like the stuff shoved under it, and like the stuff shoved under it was always just like exploding everywhere. Like my backpack was always a hot mess, just like zero organization. And that feeling, like there's, one of the experts that I talked with, like it's like on her website, it's like the feeling of 50 tabs open in your brain. I'm like, that is exactly what it feels like. And I know lots of modern women feel like that, but it's kind of like that on steroids. So like the 50 tabs open on my desk, in my brain, in my laptop bag, like that general like feeling of like I can't get things in order is like a really common initial thing. And then like task initiation is another big one. So like getting started on something, like I remember last year my daughter you know, trying to get homework done, and just like I can't even describe the kind of meltdown that would happen just to even open up a textbook, right? We're not even talking like doing the work, that's like another thing, but like getting started was an incredible challenge. So beginning something that feels like it's going to be hard is just like next level challenge. Like I could go on, there's a lot, but like those are some of the ones that are really primary for a lot of women who feel like they're just like not, you know, they don't fit the traditional mold, but like here's all of this chaos around me and I can't get started on things ever.
Excellent. No, I think that was a really good way of describing things. And yeah, I like the tab metaphor because I think that's a very good way to put it, right? And you know, it's like that can also tell you about yourself a little bit. Like if you're someone that operates with 8 different windows with 16 tabs
Or
in each one, it's like, oh,
of
maybe
those.
some of these tips will be beneficial for you. Yeah. Yes, and so I wanted to comment on a few of the comments coming in because we're going to be talking about this stuff. So one of them says, on a positive note, we're multitaskers. Yes, that is true. We're going to talk about how to basically like master that and use it to your advantage, because really it's like this creative funnel where you have amazing thoughts coming into your head all the time. It's just about capturing them in the right way. So then one of the other things someone commented was like, eat fruits and vegetables and protein, take your vitamins, don't put poison in your body like caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, sugar, junk food, prescription drugs, live clean, quit feeding your kids junk. Yes, like I definitely agree with that. And we're going to dive into like some of the lifestyle components that can help people. And, you know, it's different for everybody. Like everyone's body is unique and different. And this is why Christine and I do the type of work that we do, is to really analyze like your body and your neurotransmitters. And it's like, well, is your gut health really involved because your gut is super off? Or is it that you have like some genetic predispositions that actually make you more likely to have this kind of balance of neurotransmitters? Or maybe you like don't detox your stress hormones as well, and then that affects your neurotransmitters. So I kind of want to dive into like lifestyle components, which I always think affect any condition. And then also like predisposition or genetic or congenital things that can contribute to this. And yeah, let's just
yeah. So I want to actually hit the lifestyle piece first, because I will say I feel like I had a lot of preconceptions, and like I will say like armchair expert judgment stuff, judgy stuff, actually, not like before really diving in and understanding this. And this comes from somebody who was already in the functional health field and already had a kid with a diagnosed neurological condition. And I still had some of this like judgy thought shit going on. And some of the judgy thought shit I had going on was like, I still myself, like, because I'm exposed and like steeped in media and popular social whatever, definitely still thought, before kind of figuring this out for us, more boys. And I thought probably this is like the boys who just really should have been outside playing more, and they're not able to, and they're not really the ones who are supposed to be sitting behind their desk. And if they could just, you know, like, and I thought, you know, we need to have more more playtime at school, which I actually do still think, but like we need to have more physical activity, right? And if these boys were just not designed to sit behind a desk, and they need more physical activity, and then we wouldn't have like this whole like overdiagnosis issue. And I still think a lot of that, but I also am going to say there's a yes and that I was really blind to. And the yes and is that there's genetics and there's environment, and it doesn't look the same for everyone. And that isn't the only thing we have to do, right? So if it is, and I also will say, I think there is overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis, which is probably a whole other conversation, but I think there's a lot of overdiagnosis probably in those young boys who just need to go outside. There's a lot of underdiagnosis in women who don't look the same way, right? So yes, go outside, get nature, use your physical body. We need to get blood flow to the brain. Like all of this massively important, and it's also not the only thing. And if there's all of this also biochemical underpinnings that are not being addressed, sending your kid outside or even sending yourself outside isn't going to be the full picture. That doesn't mean it's not a really important puzzle piece. It just means it isn't the only thing going on. And to make a vast assumption without knowing what the neurochemistry is or the biochemistry or the environmental stressors it's just really like I said, it's just really blind. And I'm actually kind of shocked at how blind I was and how like the judgy thoughts I had before I actually understood this and, you know, went through all of the training to understand it better. So environment affects genetics, and I'm sure you've talked about that with other people before.
Yes. If for anybody curious, that concept is epigenetics, which means that like we have a blueprint our bodies are provided with, and then depending how you load your body environmentally, that blueprint is going to be utilized in different ways.
Then there can be multiple like genetic factors also that go into a predisposition for ADHD. And just like anything, predisposition doesn't mean that you will show up with that. So you could actually have a predisposition, have like this incredibly well managed environment, internal and external, and really never show up with those symptoms. So even if you see something on, like, let's say a genetic report, you may never actually experience that. And so I want to be clear about that too. But if you have this kind of genetic predisposition and then all of the environmental factors are right, then we can have this expression. So some of the things like did you have something on that?
I was going to say, this is also why stuff can kind of like get worse and get better and then get worse again and then get better again. It like really depends on what you're doing in your life and how you're pushing those genetic
like
pressures.
Sometimes it's just like life, right? Like sometimes we can, like, you know, maybe there's a season of life where we're traveling more and it's like a stressor, even though it's a good stressor, and it's still absolutely going to affect your physiology. So some of the things there can be, so dopamine is one of the primary things that we're talking with as a neurotransmitter, as this chemical in your messenger in your brain that is impacted genetically, potentially with ADHD. So either there can be lowered production, so we're not making enough, and dopamine helps with those things we were talking about earlier, like task initiation, but also even feeling rewarded from staying with a task. So you may not want to stay with a task because your brain is not giving you a reward chemical. So there's that piece. There can also be excessively fast dopamine breakdown. So your brain is making plenty of dopamine, but you're also like turning around and just breaking it down really fast. So same presentation, you don't have access to that same amount of dopamine. And then I also think about all of the other genetic things that aren't directly related to neurotransmitters, but that still have an impact, like things like whether you detox well or whether you have a genetic predisposition towards a poor microbiome. So if you don't detox and now we have an excessively high toxic burden on your brain and your brain's chemistry, or if you have trouble with having a good microbiome in your gut, we're not able to either make or adjust the degradation of those hormones or brain chemicals. Same thing. Now we have like an added factor on what was already kind of this foundational blueprint of what's happening with the dopamine in your brain. And so like we can't just say it's all just like go outside, right? Like there's all this stuff that happens too.
Oh no, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, right? Because I was just glancing at a few things and there's so much literature and research to support everything that we're talking about. Like there was a article in the Journal of Nutrients that suggested that gut-brain axis plays a huge role in this. This means that changes in neurotransmitter levels, inflammation, oxidative stress can all contribute to ADHD symptoms. Oxidative stress can come from a lot of things. It can come from like kids running around on grass that's had pesticides sprayed on it, or it can be from a super stressful school or home environment. Like that can come from a variety of things. And then even like the Journal of Current Psychiatry reported that the microbiome plays a role in ADHD. And when like the majority of our neurotransmitters are actually regulated by our gut microbiome, that's not really surprising. And then if our gut is super inflamed, because like, a kid that sits there and drinks like a food colored beverage and a bag of Skittles and macaroni and cheese just ingested a lot of chemicals. And those chemicals mess with your brain and they mess with your neurotransmitters, which is why it's like, it's funny how our society has made this like kid centered food culture when really like kids should just be eating real food with the rest of us, and we should just be including them as participants in family instead of like this isolated section off of the family. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate, like there's so much literature around this, and
yeah, I
it's pretty
actually,
prevalent.
I had I submitted some information to a reporter who had put out a request recently for like, hey, what are some natural like alternative things to, or are there even for Adderall or Ritalin because of these like medication shortages right now. And I went in and of course I have like my page of literature, like all of my stuff bookmarks. So it's easy for me to find. But like, I just picked 3 things and sent them over immediately. They were all like in the literature. I was like, this is, and I put it in there like, hey, should you wish to cite your, you know, the sources here, like here are the things where we're having an impact. And it was like one of the ones that was top of mind for me. So same thing, like someone actually still on a medication, but if they gave them a zinc supplement, they had a 30% decrease in their need for medication. So they could actually, like, if they wanted to stay on their medication, fine, but they had a lower need for medication. So you can lower the dose of that, right? So like, are we getting the nutrients and are we able to absorb it? It's like pretty foundational. This really shouldn't be rocket science. And yet it's still treated like that's crazy talk. Like, how could you eat food that has more zinc in it? And like, I'm like, I guess like, you know, like in the literature, this is not weird stuff, right? Like,
Yes, I completely agree. And, you know, and I just want to say, like, when it comes to like medications and stuff, we're not speaking against them. Like, they can be really helpful for some people. However, if you can resolve it by simply changing a few lifestyle factors instead of completely altering the way your brain chemistry works for a lifetime when your brain is developing, it's something worth considering. And so that's kind of what we're talking about right now. It's just like, one, how can you potentially resolve things naturally? And 2, how can you make your efforts more effective no matter what route you're taking? So let's continue down the realm of like a gut health. And I know we were kind of talking about like foods and things and like toxin exposures, and then just how that can kind of tie into inflammation. And I'll just let you go from
yeah.
there.
So, I mean, there's a lot of pieces that are like, you can unpack there. I will say, starting with like maybe like the just sensitivities to foods. I'm even just talking like non-toxic foods. I'm just gonna say like most of our American.
But some people
Yeah.
are sensitive to eggs and they
And
don't know it. The common
it's
one.
actually like, I think probably like they go hand in hand. We get overly sensitized if we've been a lot on like a hyper palatable ultra processed diet. I think the latest thing I saw was like 70% of the average kids, like American kids diet is ultra processed. Like, we're not even talking processed. We are talking like you know, like it was a line from a movie, but I always tell my kids this: there's no food in that food. Like they ask me for, like, there's no food in that food, right? Like we can't eat that. So if we have no food in our food, we're already going to be kind of like ourselves are starved. We're really looking for, you know, for anything, but we can then become more sensitive to anything in our environment. So we increase intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, and then anything that comes in, if we have you know, this higher level of intestinal micro sensitivity, and that also includes the brain. So we can have a leaky gut brain barrier as well as a leaky gut barrier. So if we've weakened that barrier by all of this other stuff, then even, you know, like you said, eggs, for example, right? Like, could be something that becomes inflammatory for somebody. And then we are creating systemic inflammation, but we're creating also brain inflammation. So we have a digestive problem. We're maybe not able to absorb our nutrients very well, but then we're getting hypersensitized to anything that's in our diet. And I will say, like, for my one kid who's like, I'll just call her my extra sensitive kid, right? My extra sensitive kid is also the one who struggles more with allergies and like has more skin issues. Yeah. And so it's almost like, I feel like she's like the little canary in the coal mine, is just like everything is, you know, is more for her system. And so we just have to be extra sensitive. But to me, I'm like, it's not great for her, but it's great that I'm like, your body is a really sensitive barometer, right? Like, we're going to be really careful about even things like the carpet we changed our carpet a few years ago. Like, what kind of carpet is going to go in our house? Like, I spent a ridiculous amount of time figuring that out. I spent way too much time figuring out what kind of pillow to buy her at Christmas, but like, her body is just more sensitive, and we have to pay attention to that. And I think a lot of people whose like their buckets are overflowing and they're having all of these symptoms, it feels like it's just like the whole thing's out of control. And it's like, well, it kind of is, but like you can go one thing at a time and just say, hey, I'm really sensitive. We're going to start with like what's in the food and what's in the water and what am I putting on my skin and like what am I exposed to and how can I start lessening all of the things that are going in that bucket so that my inflammation gets to come down.
I think what you just mentioned is, it would be really easy to just like skip over in this conversation, but it is so important. So notice how when she's talking about parenting and her kid's symptoms are flaring, she's not just figuring out how to subdue the symptoms, she's figuring out what's causing them. And I think that is a much more effective approach for not only maintaining health, but making it so that you don't have health issues down the road, especially when you're starting in things like childhood. And it's like, if your kid is super sensitive and having allergies and having all these things and they're being affected, you're probably also being affected on like a low level. It may just not be affecting you in the same way, but they're being affected by something in their environment. And so she's talking about investigating what could be the cause. And that starts with like gut health, environmental health, what's going on in your home, what's going on at their school, like what are their friends' parents feeding them, all those kinds of things. And then, you know, this translates into adults too. So if you are an adult and struggling with these symptoms, take a look at what you're putting into your body. Take a look at what you're putting on your body. Take a look at what's going on in the environment around you and just start investigating things from that perspective. So I just wanted to like asterisk that.
Totally. And,
really,
you know, I think sometimes too, when we're investigating, it's not always the obvious stuff, you know, like speaking personally, like did a gut test maybe 7-8 years ago. That was the first time I looked at my own gut. I was having a lot of hormonal symptoms, and I knew the connection. So of course that's what I was like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. Like I'm look there. I still to this day, and I've seen like hundreds of gut tests, have one of the worst gut tests I had ever seen at that point. And like to this point, it was horrible. But I didn't have digestive symptoms, right? Like I had, as far as I knew, like everything was golden there. I didn't have like gas or bloating or problems pooping or any, like it was all fine. And it was manifesting for me. And like, that was my kind of weak link, was like my hormones were getting super whacked out. So that was like the way that it showed up. And so, and same, like my poor kid, you know, they joke about the poop testing, but like they also know it's just like part of life. But they're like, okay, like, you know, she was having some skin stuff happening this last year, and I was like, well, I guess we gotta do the poop test. She's like, I don't want to do the poop test. I'm like, I know, baby, but like we have to see what's happening inside your body, because your inside skin, your outside skin are the same skin. So if you're having some skin issues, we have to know what's happening on the inside skin so that we know what's happening with the outside skin. But it's just all about like kind of peeling the onion and not just saying like the symptom is the thing and we have to banish the symptom. It's like, well, why is this showing up in the first place? Like what is pushing this? And it's going to be like different for everyone, but we also have like a lot of those same like foundational pieces that have to get cleared up before anything else can get resolved. So if we're not fixing the foundational things, like for sure, we're not going to get to the things that seem like they are the most important symptoms.
I could not agree more. And, you know, as we're talking about this, for anyone who's like not familiar with like leaky gut and why these things would affect, I'm just going to go through like a little physiological cycle. So let's say that you're a kid on the traditional American diet and you're eating that, what'd you say, 70% ultra processed diet? Yeah. That basically means most of your food was squirted out of a machine and usually imprinted with like colored dyes and things. And I heard, you know, I was talking with Chef James Berry not too long ago, and he said, make sure to eat foods that are ingredients instead of made of ingredients. And I thought that was a really good way to put things. But if you're on this like ultra processed diet, and then all of a sudden it starts to kind of inflame your gut lining and affect things, and you know, gluten's a component of that, especially here in America, just because we tend to spray our crops with Roundup before we harvest them because it preserves farm equipment and increases the yield, which means that our food is being sprayed with poison before we eat it. That can really affect your gut biome because and not only does it affect your gut lining, but it actually can kill the microbiota in your gut. So it acts like an antibiotic, because if it's a pesticide for plants, means that it's a pesticide when it's inside of your gut too. So it still kills microorganisms.
You know, this only applies to the pests. They have this, you know, biochemical pathway. Humans don't have this biochemical pathway. Like, yeah, but the bugs living in our gut do, right? Like that is like completely ignoring the rest of the physiology, right? Like, oh, humans don't have this pathway. You're not going to be sensitive to this chemical. We'll just go ahead and spray it on. Like, no.
Yep. Yep. So that starts to happen. We start to get some gut permeability, and then we start to have these innocuous foods that we shouldn't be sensitive to that accidentally lead through our gut, like dairy. Dairy's a super common one. Kids eat lots of cheese. Kids love mac and cheese. Dairy, gluten, butter, all together. Who wouldn't like that? So now that starts to kind of leak through your gut lining, and then your immune system starts to react to it. And then your immune system starts to get upregulated in these ways that it shouldn't. And then it starts to produce these inflammatory cytokines and starts to like activate these inflammatory pathways. Now, even if you don't have a leaky brain barrier, those inflammatory things can still affect your brain. Now, let's say you also have a leaky brain barrier, because kids' brain barriers are still developing when they're young. So keep this in mind. This is another reason that it's important. Their brain barriers have not fully developed. And this varies in ages across kids. We're still doing research in this. And this is why toxins and outside things young in childhood can affect the brain so much more than later in life. And so this is even more important in childhood, but it plays a role in adults too. But basically, if these things start to inflame our brain or leak across our brain barrier and then our brain reacts too, now you have an inflamed brain. And there are a bunch of components to inflamed brains. Like, it really affects your neurotransmitter production just because it like messes with the chemical cycle. It throws it onto a different circuit. Another component that's like a physical component, when your brain gets inflamed, your brain actually swells. And then it means that the neuronal synapses can't communicate as well. And so then this affects your neurons' abilities to talk to each other. No wonder you would have brain fog, right? And then it's like really hard to differentiate between when you like can't focus and can't initiate versus like having brain fog. They're kind of interrelated. And so this is how these things can play a role in this. And, you know, hormones are a big component of it, but we're also, I mean, kids have their own hormones, but not in the same way as adults. So it can affect us differently once those things start to take play. But yeah, it's important. Like, diet matters for everybody. And you know, when we look at all of our health changes over the last few decades, when we consider what has changed the most, it's our food industry and our gut health and our immune reactions to all of our environmental pressures, because we're also just exposed to way more toxins than our grandparents were. And then that also affects our agriculture and our ability to absorb nutrients from the food that is organic or all of the right things. Like, they just don't even have the same nutritional component anymore, which is where things like vitamins come in. But you know, that's, some people need them, some people don't, and that goes into the genetic play. So either way, I'd love to come back to kind of where we were talking about, you know, inflammation, lifestyle, all this stuff, but also like natural ways that we can start to mitigate this or help it. And then we can kind of dive into like, well, okay, if you are struggling with this, what are ways that you can maybe like capture all of your multitasking creative ideas? So yeah, let's just start with like your favorite ways to work on
I am gonna talk about natural ways. I'm gonna unpack for just 1 second, not even unpack, I'm gonna piggyback on what you said about that like inflamed, swelling brain. One of the interesting things that I noticed personally, I was like, I know that I shouldn't be able to like feel my brain swelling, but I literally felt like there were times when I was like under so much stress and pressure when I was dealing with my daughter's like health condition when she was first diagnosed, and the amount of pressure that I was putting on myself where I was not sleeping. I had like a corporate job. I was like a whole different world, like corporate job, 40 hours a week. And I was trying to figure out my daughter's health thing at the same time, completely abusing my body because of course I'm just like, everything's devoted to her. Right. But like staying up all night researching, well, what am I going to use to stay awake all night researching? Just like pots and pots of coffee. And then I would just dump a bunch of like sugar into my, like I had like a soup bowl size like tureen for my coffee cup. And then I would put like this organic, I'm like, it's organic, right? But like organic sugar syrup into this to like stay up all night. And then I would just like eat whatever I could get my hands on that was like fast, because I was trying to like, again, like just burning the candle at both ends. And I would wake up and I swear I would feel like my brain was just hitting the sides of my skull. Like it really felt like I could feel this inflammation. And I don't know what was happening with me other than like my entire body was obviously inflamed at that point. Right. But it was like, it really felt like my brain was on fire and like physically felt like I would wake up and like just hurt. It wasn't a it was like, it felt like my brain was swelling. I'm like, wow. Like I look back on that, I'm like, you know, like obviously I was glad to do that for my kid, but also like like this, I'm not the only one who does this, right? Like I had a particular mission, but I'm not the only one who pushes my physiology because I'm trying to do something, right? Like this is, it's common. And lots of women do this to themselves. Lots of women push themselves for whatever reason. And then we end up, maybe you feel it, maybe you don't, but you might not physically feel like I did. Like your brain is pushing on your skull, but like you feel like your whole body is just like not working. And of course your brain is part of that. So, I mean, I think foundationally is of course the most important place to start, right? And that includes things like I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't eating well. And that's like, it sounds almost like let's just roll on past that to most people. I know probably not the people who are watching you, but like it seems like that couldn't possibly be the thing. But like literally forcing myself to sleep was one of the very most important things that I did. And like one of the experts I have coming on the summit, coming up as a sleep expert, because women with ADHD also have a lot of times, like the majority actually of women with ADHD, people with ADHD, but for particularly women, have trouble with their circadian rhythm. So if you have a challenge with your circadian rhythm, which a lot of times means that you want to stay up late, and also like there's just like the thing in our culture, I read this hilarious term recently, but I've seen it a lot, which is the revenge bedtime procrastination. So like, I didn't get any damn time to myself all day. I'm going to stay up all night scrolling. Um, So
True.
this is already happening. For sure, women who have ADHD are more likely to be have a disrupted circadian rhythm. So then it gets amplified, and we're staying up till 2 in the morning. And then if you have a family, or even if you just have a job or like whatever, you have to get up at a regular time. Now we're sleep deprived. Now your brain, of course, isn't going to be working. Like, you know, your brain doesn't work well when you don't have any sleep. It sounds like super foundational, but it's also like a thing, like talking to so many women today really struggle with, like getting women to actually like have sufficient sleep it's really hard. And especially with ADHD women. When I first was like, I need to help my body and like heal, I was sleeping probably 9 hours a night. And that would be like, just to get me a baseline. And I don't really do that anymore. But I really feel it now. Like I've gotten myself to such a good place with that. Like I massively feel it if I'm not getting enough sleep. Like I am just not a good human to be around. And so like,
And let's talk for a second how and like to, you know, my heart goes out to anyone out there who was in the same position as Christine, where you're like up all night researching, trying to figure out what is going on with your health. Like I've been there too, but I'm going to advocate that what she's saying is really important, and that sleep is one of the pillars and most important things that you can do for any health condition. And if you are staying up all night and propelling yourself with coffee, you are tanking your adrenal glands. And as soon as you start doing that, you're also tanking your hormones. So I know with you being a hormone expert, I would love to hear your thoughts around that as we kind of keep going in this conversation, because it's like, this is how we get caught in these vicious cycles. So it's like, we're not feeling well, then we start to stress out about it, and then we start to stay up all night researching it, and then we don't get any sleep, and then we stress out about it more because our brain's not functioning and we can't logically think our way through things, and we just get like caught in this cycle. So I know it's like really hard when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, but if I have any piece of advice, it's like, take it one step at a time. And this is why we do this kind of education, so that you can realize that like maybe it has to do with eating fast food and drinking like a gallon of soda over the course of a week, and that can actually affect your brain in these ways. And, you know, just being like, oh, you know, maybe if I don't do that and I start to integrate real food in my life, and I go for a walk once a day, and I make sure to drink water as my first beverage in the morning, I might feel a lot better with that.
That's enough like itself. Hydration. Again, like these are like, I know they're not sexy, like, but like, it's like, unless they came in with like, and even if they came in with a broken arm, like literally anything they like come to tell me with like something's wrong with their body, I'm like, did you drink water today? Like basically anything they tell me is wrong. Like, did you drink water today? Like, it's my number one go-to. But yeah, the sleep piece. So speaking about women's hormones, I will always say estrogen, progesterone, which is where we get attached and we get interested as women, I call them the little dogs. They are the little dogs meaning they are not the things that are like, you know, pulling the big strings. The big dogs, I say there's three big dogs, which are thyroid, cortisol, and insulin. So basically, are you stressed and are you managing your blood sugar? And sleep impacts both of those things massively. So if you're not sleeping, you are, first of all, getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night. You're starting to, you can like within a week put yourself in the equivalent of a pre-diabetic state. So that'll happen really fast. Blood sugar is going to get super jacked up. And if you want to see your brain be on fire, it'll be like blood sugar going up and down. And then for sure, stress, like the cortisol is going to be seriously jacking up your hormones, but it's also going to be messing up your brain, your ability to function. We're going to be using resources for making our stress hormones instead of like neurotransmitters to think clearly. So increasing that intellectual permeability we were talking about earlier, right? So like all of this downstream stuff, physiologically, period's going to be messed up. All of this, like just from not getting enough sleep. And so that's like, it's again, like it's not easy, sexy. And I know that there is this dysregulation again, like genetically for women with ADHD, but that just means it's that much more important. And, you know, it could be like someone who's a night owl and doesn't have a lot of responsibilities the next day. Cool. Maybe you're not going to bed till like 11:30. It's still not going to say stay up till 3 in the morning. But like if you're getting the second wind and you don't have something going on in the morning, okay, no problem. But if you do have to just live in kind of the structures of like the modern world, which is like, you know, kind of daytime work hours and all of that, like start doing like getting up early and exposing yourself to natural light, like reset your circadian rhythm as much as you can. Turning off the electronic devices a couple hours before bed. Like, again, nobody likes to hear the unsexy stuff, and but it's like literally the thing that will make your brain not feel like it's swelling out of your skull.
I have noticed the screen time thing has, as much as I didn't want to admit it, it's totally a thing for my body. It's like if I don't cut my screen time like at least an hour before bed, it's like it's when you close your eyes and you feel your brain just like that's the dopamine response, and like that's the best way I can describe it. It's like your brain is just laying there like reeling through all these things, but it's like if you're sitting there scrolling, even though it seems super innocent, like you're getting like a whole bunch of dopamine hits every single new thing that you see, and so it's just literally stimulating your brain before you go to bed. So that's why it matters, in addition to the whole blue light thing, which is like a whole cortisol pathway that messes with your sex hormones and your inflammation and all of this, and like this is how they're all related. So okay, so yes, we talked about kind of hydration and sleep. Getting some like movement in during the day can be really great. What else?
So one of the
really
things
like
actually, I think the biggest, and this is across the board, every woman I've ever worked with has a challenge getting enough protein. And like literally, if we just think about where do we get the building blocks for these things, right? And even if I'm going to talk about serotonin, only not, there can be a relationship with ADHD, but because people have seen commercials, right? We've seen the commercials for drugs that are like, we're gonna like, you know, change your serotonin receptors. It's like the SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. We're like changing what's happening with your uptake of serotonin. Even if we're thinking about that, like, well, where did it come from? It doesn't matter if we play with the levels in your brain. Like, did we make any? And we make neurotransmitters, including dopamine, which is we're talking about so critical for ADHD. We make it from amino acids, which we get from eating protein. So, you know, I had a long history. I was raised vegetarian, really ate not enough protein. So talk about like that's an environmental lifestyle impact, right, on my physiology. I look back at what I ate when I was a kid, and you know, my mom was like doing the best that she could, and she actually did try and like put together what she thought, like some beans and rice and stuff. But really, the majority of the time, I was just eating a lot of carbs. Like majority of my food was just like all carbs. So of course, I didn't have any of the building blocks that I needed for my brain to be able to make the neurotransmitters, much less thinking about breaking them down or, you know, that dopamine degradation that can happen. So getting enough protein is like crazy foundational, I think, for women with ADHD. It also stabilizes blood sugar. And like I was just saying, like this whole like up and down with the blood sugar is certainly going to be massively impactful for mood and focus and energy. You're not going to be able to focus very well if your blood sugar is all over the place. So like super crazy foundational, like not getting enough protein is one of the biggest things. Like sleep and protein and water, I'm like, if we just nail those things, like so many of the other things start to feel easier, and then it feels easier to start doing maybe the harder work or the next steps because like you are in a better level like foundation to start with.
Absolutely. So so we've talked about all the like ways that we can do things in our lifestyle to help kind of regulate. I mean, this stuff will regulate anybody, but if you're struggling with a condition like this, like it'll certainly help to regulate your brain to get it less inflamed and to get your neurochemistry on point. But let's just say that it's, you know, you have a genetic predisposition towards this and it's a little bit more challenging for you than other people to manage. All right, well, let's talk about some of the tools that you can do in your life to actually like take advantage of this thing. And we mentioned in the beginning, like, makes you an incredible multitasker. This is true. It also means that you usually have like a lot of creative ideas like flitting through your brain and flitting out the other side, but it's usually like people don't have a way to capture them. So I'm curious, like, and I can speak to some of the stuff I do in my own life, but for you, since it's something that you like live, what are some of the things that you like to do as a highly productive and proficient woman who like owns her own business and does all of these big things? Like, how do you manage some of your tasks and how do you make things, how do you turn this to
so I want to say two things. First of all, like I do think there can be like kind of a superpower component, especially because of the flip side of sometimes the hard time with task initiation can be hyperfocus. So hyperfocus meaning that like when our brains get onto a task, and I always have kind of joked that like the reason I was able to like kind of help my daughter like get resolved early on was I'm a pit bull. Like if I cannot let go of it, right? I'm just like completely latched on, which can certainly be, there's pros and cons to that, but like for sure, if there is a hyper focus, then someone can go really deep. And that's one of the like maybe silver linings with ADHD. There's also like a lot of times creativity, a lot of times what's called divergent thinking, which is again, something like I had already recognized in myself for a long time. I just didn't really realize it was part of the way that my brain was wired, which means like lots of things that look like they would be not connected to somebody else. I can really see all of those connections. So those are some of the things that can be like, we'll say like a silver lining. What I always want to be really clear about is that like I am all about supporting the things that are working well and trying to put love and attention on what isn't working well. So we're downplaying that. But I don't ever want to say like this doesn't mean that there isn't still a challenge present, right? Or downplay like the very real challenges that exist around this. So I think about, and I like, this is the way I talk about genetics to people too. When like nobody has a perfect genetic picture where it's like I only have things that are in support of my wonderful existence and me having the fullest life, and I have nothing that's a challenge. That does not exist. Everybody has something that is going to be like their particular little challenge, and so it's not about like, well, I'm screwed, I have this thing. It's more about like, okay, now I know I have this thing that's so helpful because now I know where to put like supports up. And I almost think about it like when you're bowling, these are like the like bumpers on the bowling lane to make sure that the bowling ball keeps like moving in the right direction. So like, I think about like, for me and my daughter, I'll give a perfect example. Like things that we know help with an ADHD brain with like task initiation or even getting something done is something called body doubling, which just means like it's really helpful for us to get things done if there's somebody else in the room. This isn't vitamins or supplements or food or even sleep. It's just like, it really helps me do stuff if somebody is with me, right? And so like, just knowing that that's true, like my daughter, like yesterday, she like wanted, or sometime over the weekend, she wanted me to help her clean her room. And I'm like, great. And I was like, do you just need someone to be there with you? And she's like, yes. And then, another, like last night, she needed to feed the dogs. We have a puppy and like, it's a whole production to put together the puppy's food. And she was like really stalling. Like she was standing by the door, like not really getting, and I said, hey baby, do you just need me to like be there with you while you make the food? Yes. So like, as soon as I'm physically present and like, I'm her body double, she could totally go get that food made. It was just like, she can get started. And same thing like with her homework or like creative projects, like anything that's like, we know that you could get your hyper focus. It could be amazing. You could get your creative juices flowing. It could be amazing. But you're like, oh my gosh, I just can't like get the juices flowing. You're just like, okay, well, what are some supports that I need? Maybe I just need someone to help me, like someone to be here with me, right? Or, one of the experts I interviewed, she's actually a productivity expert for people with ADHD, which I just love, like, because we need that, right? she has someone who comes over once a week and like does half her filing and she does the other half, but it's the same thing. She's like, I just need that person to come be in my office, and then the filing gets done. And then she can actually use all of her gifts in the world because she's not worried about like the piles of filing to be done in her office. She can go out and like be the amazing coach that she is because like that stuff is taken care of, right? So I don't think I have the perfect system for everything. I will say one thing is I have gotten better at like my very favorite tool is whenever I touch something, especially digital, how can I make it better for myself the next time I touch it? So I got this idea from a book called, I believe it's called How to Build a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. So I like that book a lot. But it was like every time you touch something, how do you make it a little bit easier for future you to access and use it? And like, you know, it's just like that one idea was so helpful to me. It's like, okay, I'm going to come across these open tabs again, for example, at some point. How could I make it easier the next time I'm here? Or I'm going to open my inbox again another time today. How could I make it a little bit easier for my future self when I touch this inbox? And I don't think it's like the thing that's the same for everybody, but like if you have that mentality of I could make my life easier, a little bit easier the next time I come across this recipe, or like I save my family's favorite meals on this just like notebook in my kitchen. Like every time I make a meal that they like, it just goes on the master list. So if at some point I'm like, well, I don't know what to make for dinner, and like that would normally make my brain explode, but I could just this list where, you know, past me has written down 30 ideas that my family actually liked. Cool, that makes it easier. So it's just like I just think about what's going to make my next, like the next step for me easier, and whether that's like a particular, it doesn't matter if it's a particular organization system or a particular notebook or, you know, whatever, Asana, or it, because we all have our preferences on what works. It's just like being willing to say, here's a place where I have a challenge. I know this is going to I know I'm going to have this challenge. How can I make this challenge a little bit easier the next time I come across it?
Yeah. Yep. I like that approach a lot. I'm gonna have to check out that book. You
Brain.
said
It
it was
was like
called How
it's
to
all
Build a
about like
Second Brain.
organizing your digital life, which has been the bane of my existence since having a digital life. So it's actually really, really helpful. Yeah, I love that book.
Well, and I kind of approach things similarly, and it's like I saw someone ask earlier, maybe you can comment on this when I'm done, but she said like, how do you go about getting diagnosed as an adult with ADHD? You know, if I'm honest with myself, I probably have a lot of these tendencies, which is why I do so many different things. I know myself, and I know if I only do one thing, I have a tendency to uh, get focused on it. And so it's like it's almost helpful to me to have multiple things going at once. And so it's like I haven't, you know, been properly diagnosed, but it wouldn't surprise me. And it probably depends on the state of my brain. It probably depends on how inflamed I am. I have certain days where I have more of these tendencies and certain days where I'm more focused. So I'll let you comment on like the diagnosis. But for anyone who like doesn't have a diagnosis, but you still struggle with these things because it's a real thing, I do a lot of the same stuff. And like one of the, like I used to try to write down all of my ideas in like the iPhone notes app. That was great until I ended up with like 500 notes. So if you're going to do that, it's like build categories within a note and then go put your thought underneath a category. And that's like, if you can build, like what she was talking about, it's like building an outline as you go. And like, I am a huge outlines person. I love outlines. I even made an outline like before this talk. It helps me focus and it helps me segregate and list and layer my ideas. And so for me, like I use a project management app called Asana that I've been really liking, and I'm still playing around with it and getting a feel for it. But it allows me to create those layers and like assign myself tasks with due dates. And if I'm standing in the grocery store line and I have that really great thought of like, I want to do a live for them on this topic, I have somewhere to put it so I don't forget it. And that I think is one of, I mean, even when you look at like the great minds in the world who like run huge companies and do 8 million things, they usually have some kind of task management system like that, or somewhere where they like write down their ideas or their thoughts, or some assistant that they send it to, or something. Like you have to capture them in the moment. The app I just mentioned is Asana, like ASANA. There's a bunch of different ones. I just like that one. And then the other thing that I love doing, especially like, I think a lot of ADD or ADHD people are immensely creative, but don't really have the outlets for it, especially as we continue to get rid of recess and gym and art in school, which is like very, very terrible, I think. Yes, I think it's a detriment to society to do those things. So if you don't have an outlet for those things, turn the work that you're doing into art. So let's say that you are a high schooler and you have to like write a history report and you're like, this sucks. This is the worst thing ever. A mind map is something where you like write down your main topic in the center, and then on the outside you like write down all the ideas that you have floating around in your head. They don't have to be in any particular order. And then you just start drawing lines between them. And then like on the line, you're like, oh, they're related because of this way. And within like 10 to 15 minutes, you basically have your entire essay written as a picture. And then you just have to go through and write it. And mind maps are incredibly helpful for memorizing things. Like it is how I memorized pathology, because I would sit there and I would write out a condition and all the things that went with it and how everything interrelated. And I think that's how I ended up liking looking at the body like I do, is because that was the way I studied it, was how everything relates to everything else, literally like drawing all these relationships between it, because I'm a super visual person. So it's like play to your strengths is what we're talking about, and know that you're not trapped in the mechanism of society and that you can modify what you're doing. Or like another really good one, in high school, I like resented our teachers for making us do this, but now I'm like, this is actually a really helpful thing. She made us write down different pieces of what we wanted in our essay on note cards, and then lay all the note cards out on the floor and then organize them and like rearrange the note cards. I now do this with Post-it notes on my wall when I'm like planning something and I want to create something, because it allows me to move my thoughts around. And sometimes it's just different doing it tactilely than doing it digitally, like on a computer. And then I'll say like the last thing that I have been learning about myself, because that's the thing, like we're all always learning, we're all always improving our tactics. But for myself, I cannot operate in a calendar on my phone. Like, I mean, I can,
Yeah.
but I can't create anything from it. I need like a wall calendar that is at least 4 months long for me to be able to like be like, oh my gosh, like the entire summer fits into this little box on my wall. That's not as long as I thought. Okay, let me figure out what things I need to do each week to accomplish this task by this date. And it allows you to start to break things down. So if you're a person who has a tendency to get overwhelmed or you don't know where to start, you can start with a timeline. And I am a visual person. Like I need a bigger space than my computer screen for my brain to see it all. And like I'll use my phone for like looking at the week, but I can't use it for looking at a month, and I can't use my computer for looking at a month or a couple months. And now I'm trying to master the art of like the daily planner, where I'm like, okay, for this 15-minute block, I'm doing this. For this 10-minute block, I'm doing this. And this is how a lot of the like high-powered executives run their lives, is they just like block time out. And you can have a list of tasks to do, or you can like schedule your tasks in that way. Or one of the other things I've started to doing is I have a list of tasks that would take me 15 minutes, and I have a list of tasks that would take me 30 minutes. And when I have a gap in my schedule where I'm like, oh, okay, I have 15 minutes, what can I do right now? I can go select a task from that list and just get it done. So those are just like some productive tips. That was my little rant on it. But yes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if anybody is, looking to understand their personal situation with this condition more, and any resources that you have, because I think you said you have a summit coming up, which would be a perfect place to learn more about this.
So one thing I will say is I am also a paper calendar person for anything that's planning. And a few years ago, I was attempting to both have a Google Calendar, and because I love paper so much, I still had like my paper planner that I was in love with, and it was so beautiful, and like I had colored pens and made me happy, but I like double books and things, and they were like, I can't have two places where I'm actually tracking my calendar. So I went to the Google Calendar as like my that's what I live and die by. It's funny because speaking of like the whole ADHD thing, my kids know if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen. Even like Target, like they're like, Mom, is Target on your calendar? Because if Target's not on my calendar, they're not getting whatever it is they needed from Target, right? But like to plan the summit, for example, I absolutely had to have a physical paper, not a planner, but like the old school calendar, so I could see like where's the dates and what is happening on the Friday versus like the rest of the months, and like it really just visually like helps me a lot. So I'm all about using whatever tools work for you. The other thing where I've just like developed grace for myself is I like to, like any books, I listen and read alternating. So like I like go take walks and I kind of process while I'm listening to the book. But then I will like, you know, put bookmarks in on things that I think are interesting. And then I will go back to my physical book and highlight. And I just like accept that that's part of my brain. And I accept that that's how my brain works. And I don't stress about it or worry about it or push back on it. I'm like, that's just how my brain works. And I'm gonna honor that. So the whole getting diagnosed question, I actually feel like we could spend a lot of time on, and I don't want to like go for another 30 minutes, and I want to be respectful. I will just say, if you, really the primary reason I even went down the diagnosis pathway was because I knew my daughter would need it for us to get some support from the school system. If I was just a woman, an adult who was like operating in the world, and like I didn't necessarily need someone to give me that like formally from on high. I already, like, as soon as I saw the puzzle pieces from my biochemistry, I was like, obviously didn't need someone else to tell me. I just went with that because I needed that formal piece. So the one thing I will say about this is that you absolutely need to go to someone who is knowledgeable and educated on ADHD, specifically in women. I've talked to many women who were dismissed for various reasons, including being successful. Because someone didn't know about it, like just someone close to me, I will say, in my family, was getting a PhD, and like literally the words out of the psychiatrist's mouth were, "You cannot have ADHD because you are getting a PhD." And she's like, "Do you know how hard it is for me to get this PhD?" So those things, just like, there's very little that makes me as mad as like, you can't have it because this. You're successful. Like, you know, I have a master's degree. Like, okay, you got this degree, you couldn't possibly, like, makes me very mad. So you have to go to somebody who knows about ADHD, and specifically ADHD in women, and also who is not going to write you off. And if someone writes you off and you feel like I know the criteria and I've read all the things and I think I meet it, then go find somebody else. And that's true for anything in health. But for sure, this has been so under recognized in women that there's still a lot of misconceptions and a lot of like, you're a woman, you're, you know, successful, whatever, it can't be you. I mean, I think every woman that I spoke to, and I have two guys, wonderful guys too, but like everybody I spoke to on the summit was like, yeah, someone at some point dismissed me. So don't take no for an answer if you feel like you need it, want it for some reason, and someone isn't listening to you, is what I would say about that. So as far as the summit, I'm super excited. So I really, what I found when I got this diagnosis was kind of what I found with my daughter's initial diagnosis a decade ago, which is that there weren't a lot of resources, at least not all in one place. So there wasn't like a place I could go where I was like, what do I do if I want to heal my brain naturally? There was like actually some books out there, which is great. There was a training program that I went through, which is the same one that you went through. Like there were things, but they were all being talked about on different stages. And I was so interested in how I could get all of these voices together on one stage. So just talking about things like gut health and food sensitivities, but also even things like, you know, how do I organize my desk if I have ADHD? Or, you know, what is the impact of like, what are some natural things that I could do for support, like just for my sleep, or what are things I can do for someone's talking about essential oils even, right? So like, there's just like, where can I have a conversation with everybody? And since the conversation wasn't being had on a central stage, I decided to build the stage. So built the stage, all of that is happening this week. So the link is herbrainsummit.com. So it's pretty easy to remember, I think. And, you know, just lots of people talking about how we can support and heal our brains naturally, and not necessarily just require prescriptions. And again, I'm actually not anti-prescription, but even if you're on a prescription, there's so many ways that we can support our bodies to maybe need less, or not feel like we're reliant on it, or not feel like if something happens and there's a shortage of medication out there, like I'm just screwed, right? So I think that having all of these ways that we can support ourselves so it doesn't matter what else is happening in the world is just so important. So yeah, that's what I created with the summit, and I'm just, I'm super excited about it.
Thank you so much for just everything. I think this was a really valuable talk for a lot of people. And I love that you have taken the time to put a summit together, because that is no easy feat and takes a lot of focus and organization.
Into my rescue for this
so
one.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I guess just thank you so much. And if anybody wants to reach out to you,
Yeah,
where
so
should they go?
easily just DM me here on Instagram, and we can connect. Come to the summit. We'll be sharing a lot of resources there as well. And I am going to be opening up a Facebook group actually for women with ADHD this week. So as soon as I get that up, I'll put a post on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, I so enjoy all of our conversations, and it's so much fun getting to like talk the nerdy physiology behind things with somebody. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
And yeah, I can't wait for the summit.
All right,
You're
bye.
welcome. Have a wonderful day.